Okay, let me start. So I am Satyanarayana Manyam from Google, and my mission at Google is to make the web faster. So before we start, let me show you a quick video. So this is basically a video of the conference website loading from some site someplace in Delhi using the real networks on a DSL connection with a cold cache. You can see that you might say that web is fast, but on a real world scenario, the web is really not really fast. So it almost took 14 seconds to start render, and it is still taking some time to load. So basically the left Twitter icons thing just loaded. So basically this is the typical the web loading of the conference homepage from somewhere in Delhi. So this thing is taken using webpages.org, which is a performance tool which is used for measuring the performance of websites. So to understand why the web is so slow, let's look at various key components of the web page. So this is a typical waterfall diagram of the previous page load. A waterfall diagram is basically all the requests that are loaded for a web page in a timeline chart. Every line in this thing represents a request. So for example, if you load a HTML page, it's not just like you are loading one request, you eventually make hundreds of requests to completely load that web page. So this request consists of HTML pages, CSS resources, JavaScript, and images. So for the typical web page, there are three key components that needs to be loaded. The first is actual HTML content. So I'm not really sure how clear it is, but each of these colors represents various things happening while loading the page. So numbers, but typically there are few colors here. Each of color represents various things. If you see the orange part here, which the initial DNS connection. For example, if you loaded a page called google.com, it takes some time for it to resolve google.com to some hosting IP address. So this is basically the DNS connect time, which is basically the orange part of it. And then we have the green part, which is basically once the browser requests for google.com page, the server needs to respond back with some content. The green part basically is that, and the blue part is actual time that is taken for downloading all the content. So the first part of a typical HTML page is making the initial connection and loading the HTML contents. So the second part is basically the CSS and the JS files that are part of head that gets loaded. So it's worth to note that unless all the CSS and JavaScript files present in the head are downloaded and executed, the web rendering really won't start. So for example, these are all the JS and CSS resources. Every line here represents a request that is downloaded by the browser. So you can see that there are like around 20 resources that are downloaded from the head. Until all this happens, the page really won't render. So a number is not clear, so but it's taking like 14 seconds for all these resources in the head to be downloaded. Until then, page won't start rendering. That is the reason in the previous video you haven't even seen a single character rendered until 15 seconds. The third part of the web page loading basically constitutes of rendering of the actual HTML content and the images that are needed for the HTML to load and the inline JavaScripts. So basically, to summarize, the typical web page load constitutes of three pieces, which is basically the initial HTML page load, JavaScript and CSS, and the actual resources on the page. So if you have seen the previous video, so to make that particular video faster, all you need to do is make sure that you reduce all these segments so that it consumes lesser time for each of these. So what does you get by making the web faster is basically you get better user engagement and customer satisfaction. It might also add a competitive advantage to you. But if you take what are the key challenges for making this happen, it's really hard to understand why it's hard. There are a lot of tools available online today to help you with analyze your web pages and gives you suggestions to optimize your web pages for latency. One of such tools is PageSpeed. This is basically a summary of the suggestions that are given by PageSpeed tool by Google for making your websites faster. So if you look at the suggestions, a few things like I will read out because I'm not sure how visible the text is. So the first one says optimize images. If you look at the previous slide, the third part, which basically that renders the HTML content and renders the images, it's really huge. It is almost from 14 seconds to 28 seconds. So it took 18 seconds or 13 seconds. So if you optimize the images which are loaded here, so optimizing the image basically reduces the size, which reduces the download time. So if you have optimized the images, all these blue bars will have been much smaller, hence pushing the page load time to a lot earlier. So this is one of the suggestions. So another suggestion is like enable compression, which is basically you send the HTML content, JavaScript, and all rest of the things in a compressed format or minified format. For example, if you develop a JavaScript, it's really hard to write something like thing like you write with more readable names, but on the wire they might consume a lot more bytes than needed. So enable compression basically enables gzip and optimizes and minifies your pages. So if you do that optimizations, what happens is like, for example, if the HTML page is say 40 kilobytes, if you gzip, there is a 60% text compression for gzip on text, so it will eventually be only 12 or 15 KB. So basically this bar will be like 60% less. So it eventually piles up, like every bar will be a lot shorter, and eventually your page will load faster. So these are few suggestions. So then you can ask me why it is hard if all the suggestions are right here. So let me explain you. So it's far easier said than done. So if you look at these suggestions, optimize images, it's not just you need to optimize images on all the pages on your website across all your website, not just now. For example, you have optimized all the images on your websites, but tomorrow you get a new image, you need to optimize it again. It's not one-time task. For example, if all of you use JavaScripts and write JavaScripts for your web pages. So if you have optimized and minified the JavaScript, you can't really continue developing on the JavaScript. So basically you need to go to the previous version and you develop and you minify again after your changes. So all these things are not one-time tasks. It's kind of evolving, and it happens every time you change your website. So basically you need to do it every time you change something. And it's not just for one page on your website, it's on all your pages on all the pages on your website. So it gets really harder to do this. To help you with this, so we provide some tool which automates all this for you. So all you need to do is configure your service, and we'll automate all these optimizations whenever possible on your website. You really, if you add a new image, you really don't need to optimize it. The service will do. So let me brief you on something we have, which is basically a PageSpeed service, which is a service that kind of optimizes all your web pages on the fly, making sure the content is delivered as fast as possible. Everything happens automatically, so that you really don't need to repeat the process of optimizing of your things every time, and you have the convenience of developing your code in a far more readable way. You really don't need to worry about minifying. You can write in however you want to write your code and making sure the functionality works, and PageSpeed service will take care of doing all the optimizations of your images, JavaScript, CSS, do all the needed changes to deliver it as fast as possible. This is how a typical PageSpeed service flow looks. Without PageSpeed service, the request from the browser directly ends up on the hosting provider for that particular website, and the hosting provider will return the content to the client, which is basically your browser. With PageSpeed service, what happens is instead of sending the request to the hosting provider, it will be sent to PageSpeed service servers, which in turn requests the actual content from the backends and analyzes the pages and sees what all optimizations that are needed for that pages to load faster, and automates the process of doing all these things without even you manually doing anything, without any of your inputs, and delivers the most optimized content to all your users. So the key thing to note here is all these things happen so automatically So you really don't need to worry about when your site changes. Everything happens, everything flows. To understand how optimizations work or how valuable these optimizations are, let's look at. So basically, this is basically my image from the conference website, which is like posted on the speaker's page. If you look at it, it took 30 kilobytes to download this page. So, for example, if you do various image optimizations, effectively, like basically there are a lot of image optimizations that you can do on the image, like stripping unnecessary information, reducing the quality, changing the color sampling. So even if you look so closely, you won't really find any difference between all these images visually. But if you look at the size, this image is like 10% of the image that is being served on the web page. So basically you will end up saving around 87% of your bytes, which saves a lot of your bandwidth that you need to serve. It's not only just saves the bandwidth, it also helps you load the pages faster. Assuming that you might say that this is a one corner case, but assume that if you have even 50% reduction on average, basically you reduce your bandwidth consumption of your website by half. If you take the diagram, assume that all these blue bars goes to half, you eventually pull this line exactly to the center. So you actually saved like 5 seconds of the page load time. So this is just one of the optimizations. These are the few of the image optimizations we do, and there are a lot more. This might be one of the simplest optimization techniques we use. Sure. Yes, everything happens on the fly. It's not so. So you really don't need to do anything. It's not like you install some tool called PageSpeed Service and you keep your website in that and it gives you optimized page. It basically you configure your website so that it redirects your users to PageSpeed Service servers, and which actually serve traffic for your website in a way that whenever it sees a new request, it fetches from your backend servers, which are basically your hosting providers, and optimizes them and caches them and delivers it to the users. So the objective of this service is to make sure that even with the extra overhead of something in between, we will deliver it as fast as possible. I'll show you some videos and some other explanation later, which makes it pretty evident. So this might be one of the simplest optimizations we do. We just take the image and recompress it. So going ahead, if you look at this, whenever you load a page, if you look at it, it's not like the complete content of your page is not really visible at the first shot. For example, if this is the home page of the conference website, if you load on a typical 1024 x 768 of your window size, or maybe 1024 cross whatever bigger sizes, this is basically loaded at a resolution of 1900 x 1200, and all I can see when I first see the web page loaded is just this part of it, but what actually loaded is this whole thing. So do we really want all this? So if at all I haven't requested all these images when the initial page request happens, I might have saved a lot of bytes, as well as I might have delivered the page faster. So we have optimization called lazy load images, which basically injects a client script, small client script, that requests only the images that are present in the client view, which eventually helps you load requests only whenever they are needed, eventually saving the bandwidth as well as reducing the time that needs to load the pages. So going ahead, it's not just the images below the visible area that are not really needed, it's all this HTML content is also not really required when the initial shot of the page got rendered. So what we do is something called prioritize visible content, which basically is one more optimization. If you look at HTML now always loads in terms of blocks. So you have HTML rendering happens in terms of blocks. So if you take all the blocks that are needed to render the visible portion, that is minimally required for you to display the web page at the beginning. So this optimization basically does, it restructures the HTML page in such a way that all the HTML and scripts that are needed for displaying the visible portion will be loaded first and rest will be loaded later. So eventually what happens doing this is the perceived time for the page decreases a lot. If you look at again this initial diagram, so doing this particular optimization, basically you are loading lesser HTML. So basically this part is less. You are loading only the JavaScripts that are needed for rendering the visible content at the beginning. So this part is less. You are just loading what is needed, really needed for displaying the content in the beginning. So this part might be less. So what it helps you is like reduce the perceived page load time of a web page. So these are some of the optimizations we have, and these are like more optimizations that we do in general. So we have various categories of optimizations that we do. For example, if you take the optimizations that come under the category of reducing the number of requests, so basically we do something called JavaScript combining. Assume, for example, if you, again, I'm taking the same slide because it is simpler to explain for me. For example, this thing loads like 15 JavaScripts, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other, and each JavaScript has a significant amount of green and blue, which indicates that it needs to connect to the server, and server needs to start responding, and server needs to deliver that content. Assume that you have combined all these, anyway, all these JavaScripts are really needed for loading your page. If at all you have combined all these JavaScripts, you might have saved all the green parts of it, eventually reducing this part to exactly half, saving like 3-4 milliseconds of the page load time. Some more optimizations we do is basically something like inline images. So if there are like a lot of small images, we basically inline them, so we reduce the number of requests. So all these optimizations happen so automatically, you really don't need any effort on your part. You just do the initial setup of configuring your website to talk to PageSpeed Service, and providing a hosting place where we can fetch the actual content from. That's done. It's one-time task, and from then on you get all these optimizations automatically. So for example, this is the same webpage test.org tool which I used to generate some performance metrics for the same conference homepage. If you look at this, these are various categories of optimizations that can be done, and what is the current performance of the website. So basically, for example, this says compressed text, which it has rated F, which means that none of the content on the page is really compressed, and compressing it might have reduced the page load time a lot better. And some other key things to note is you can't really see the numbers, I guess, so, but I can read out. So basically, for this particular page, it took like 3 MB of data to download, and it took like 95 requests, and it took around 14 seconds to start rendering the page. So assuming that this page has used PageSpeed Service, these are the same performance tool running on the page that is using PageSpeed Service. All the metrics went A. The amount of content that is downloaded for this particular page has reduced from 3 MB to just 600 kilobytes, which is like 70% of byte gains. And if you see number of requests that are made for a repeat view, which reduced from 85 to 4, which is basically if you load the page again, second time, how many requests do you actually make, which has reduced like drastically. And if you see this key metric, which is when the render starts, which is like with PageSpeed Service, it's around almost like 4 seconds. So basically, content will start and are taken from a client browser in Delhi using a DSL connections with the real world networks with a cold cache. So DSL connection is like far more advanced than average connection typical Indian user has. So basically, this video explains what you can get. So if you want to see how your own website performs with PageSpeed Service, all you need to do is like you can type in webpagetest.org/PSS, and you can type in your website and see how PSS can do on your website. And if you tried out your website and if you want to sign up for PSS, you can go to this go-to link, which is goog.gl/ftdh small h capital H. Maybe I can post it out somewhere. And once you sign up, we'll send you an invitation to try out a PageSpeed service. So again, key things to note here are the configuration you need to do is basically setting up your website, and everything flows. All the optimizations will happen automatically. I want to also show you. This is basically a report. Once you try out that webpagetest.org, this is basically a report that generates how good your website will be. This I can zoom in. So basically, using PageSpeed service, this tool says WebPageTest is an open source tool that used for measuring performance. This says you can get like 73% faster pages in first view, which basically is like you might save like 73% of your time that you do on browsing, at least for on this website. So for signing up for PageSpeed service, this is the link. Sorry, I am very bad at presenting. Oh. Can you see this? Okay. So basically it's goog.gl/F, capital T, capital D, small h, and capital H. Do you have any questions? Yes. Yeah. Swap the DNS entry for example.com to point to one of the DNS thing we give, and you also need to give us a IP address where we can fetch the origin content. So we kind of are before you, so that we make sure that we get the request, and whenever we only fetch from the backend whenever it is really needed, and we do a lot of extensive caching and optimizations that you really don't. The traffic we get will be like. And you don't use this traffic data in any way? No. That's in the contract. Yes. So basically, the TOS particularly says you can read up on the TOS on. You can search for PageSpeed service and you can read up on the TOS, and it's clearly mentioned what exactly how your data is used, or what exactly are the contract with your data. Yes. So it talks about all those. So what exactly are the contract for the visitor data we have, and we also have a console. Once you configure your website with PageSpeed service, we also have a console which shows your performance data, the traffic data, the key metrics that you need to monitor, and so all the rewriters I have shown, you get a lot more control. So basically, you can tweak however you want. So it gives you like 40-50 controls so that you can tweak however you want. Just pointing the DNS entry should no way affect you in any way with the PageRank. So
because like it will be like you will be redirected to the new site if my PageRank for my website is 6, so immediately it will fall to 0.
So basically there is no really a redirect. Basically it's all, instead of saying you use this IP address to fetch the content, you will say use this IP address to fetch the content. So there is, from a top level, there is no change on how things work. So your website will still be, if your website is www.example.com, your website will still be www.example.com, which is really important thing for PageRank and similar stuff. So it will no way affect PageRank. So we don't use any redirects here. It basically you change the IP address where you do the hosting, which basically will have no impact on PageSpeed or whatever, the PageRank.
The another question is like, if my site is having registered users and they have to log in, so that login data will pass through this service. So is there any security problem, like username, password passing through the another
so
site?
Generally all the password related stuff will be done through HTTPS, and we are currently working on making PageSpeed service work with HTTPS, but it's not, we are not there right now. So if you really have some HTTPS content on your website, you need to move it to some subdomain, but we are working on it hardly to make it available as seamless as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I want to use this PageSpeed service in my company network. Sure. Can I do that?
So you are saying for your internal service rather than?
Yes, I don't want to depend on internet. It should be available to me within my company network.
So currently there are 2-3 flavors of PageSpeed service, which basically one flavor is basically we provide a Apache module. If you internal systems use Apache, you can install that module, and all these benefits will be kind of.
Is it free one? Is it free or licensed?
It is free. Everything is free here. So the mod PageSpeed plugin, everything is open sourced. For PageSpeed service, it's free right now, and it is still in beta, and we are working on the pricing.
So from the same site, I can download that tool to configure for
internal thing.
Yeah.
So you can go to you can search for PageSpeed service, and it takes you to a page where it provides you 3-4 flavors of the whole speeding up thing, which is like one flavor is mod PageSpeed, which is an Apache plugin, which you can install on your Apache servers, and we have similar plugins for I think for IIS servers as well. So this is basically a plugin to your actual hosting thing, which does subset of all these things, which that can be done in an isolated environment.
Thank you.
To build on what you just said, plan to change the licensing of mod PageSpeed anytime?
No, mod PageSpeed remains as open source, and we have one more flavor which is called PageSpeed Automatic, which is kind of a library. Basically, it's a C++ library. If you are building your own host, whatever serving systems, you can install that library, and you can plug into that library. Even PageSpeed Automatic is open source library, and it remains open source.
No. Open source is fine, but what is the license exactly?
So licensing will be free.
Okay.
For the PageSpeed Automatic and mod PageSpeed libraries, the licensing is free. A GPL. Okay, you can check on the documentation actually. So So thank you for your questions. I will stay here for some more time if you have any questions, or if you, I don't think the link is pretty much visible, so but you can catch me and I can send you a link for how you can sign up for PageSpeed service, and you get the activation link to try it out. And please search for PageSpeed service on Google, and you will find all the information that I talked mostly about, like how do you test your web page with the web page test or tool which I have mentioned. Everything will be present when you search for PageSpeed service. Our documentation has everything. So please refer to the documentation. I will be here for some more time. If you have any questions, you can catch me up. Thanks, Gits, again for giving me the opportunity to talk about PageSpeed service.